Hi, to discuss how the pandemic is affecting the insurance industry, we're today with James Platt, who is Chief Operating Officer at Aon, the insurance firm. James, many thanks for joining us. It's obvious, I think, to everybody that COVID's had a huge impact on the health and well-being of individuals, as well as on society at large. What are some of the major impacts you've noticed in the insurance industry?
So, Kelvin, look, first of all, thank you for having me join you both. It's been an interesting time, and I think there's a couple of ways of looking at it. That in the short term, it's been, can we actually keep going? I mean, can we take an industry that is, and particularly in the area Aon works in the commercial space, that is very much been built around one-to-one direct relationships, and can we virtualize that overnight? And obviously, every industry has had to face the same issues. But at the beginning of it, we had competitors calling us and saying, hey, maybe we should just do renewals because we're not sure we've got the infrastructure to cope. But actually, we were fortunate in investing pretty heavily in some virtual infrastructure ourselves. But I think the whole industry rapidly has learned how to deal with claims, get them paid, manage renewals, and just do the basic stuff actually pretty well. And not seamlessly, but almost seamlessly. So that part, I think if you say, how's the industry coped? I'd say remarkably, and remarkably given where it started from. But I think as we look forward, and we've already seen it in some areas like terrorism, where a combination of government support and insurers and people like Aon between working with large groups of clients coming together to think about what are the solutions we want. In the UK here, obviously flood has been a great example where there's been a lot of new relationships built around some risks that insurers themselves couldn't necessarily take on. But for us, and it's not quite, it's almost the other impact. I mean, I think we see it that to really deal with the significant catastrophic threats and man-made or natural, you need different ways of coming together, whether it's governments, whether it's making the industry larger, whether it's creating new forms, new ways of getting together. To solve some of these risks, we're going to need to. But I do think it'll change the relationship. And the last thing I'd say is I'm pretty confident that we will be completely differently prepared for the next crisis.
The last couple of years, I've spent a bit of time thinking about fintech, thinking about insurtech, and there's been lots of discussion about disruption. For probably the last 3 or 4 years, there's tons of venture capital money in this space. But actually, the insurance value stream has been remarkably resilient through a lot of this time. Now, how much do you think that something like COVID-19 could have an impact that actually potentially accelerates some of that disruption, changes it perhaps? What are some of your thoughts on that?
So I think the easy answer here is to jump and go, it's all going to change, it's all going to somehow digitize, everything's going to be done on marketplaces. If you're a large organization, one of our clients with a large casualty program, really long tail risks, you're not going to suddenly want to move away from the insurers that have been working with you for the last 15 years. So yes, it's going to change in some ways, and of course cost is an issue. I mean, our industry as a whole, and again, you can talk about why scale is important. Our industry as a whole takes $1 of client money, right, and basically destroys, depends what line, right, but 40% of it in terms of transactional cost. However you look at it, right? Now you can say, hey, you get a lot of services for that, but only 60% comes back in terms of actual paying claims. That's not a really efficient model. Now, there's a lot of reason for that. Actually, bearing risk is an extremely complicated business. It's not easy at all. So I totally understand why, but could it be 20% that gets burned? Absolutely. And I think that, so the digital transformation will be one part, but where I was going earlier, around product, I think is probably the most important. I mean, how do we make supply chains resilient? How do we allow firms to feel confident to invest again in how do we ensure and protect people who want to do global business?
James, we also wanted to touch on leadership and the evolution of leadership as a response to COVID-19. I mean, clearly we've all been through this crisis together. So there is a sense of, need for greater empathy, greater, cohesion, and also how do we manage virtual teams. So I would be very interested in hearing your thoughts in terms of how you personally live this experience with your teams, and perhaps what are some of, the lessons learned that you'd like to share with us.
For my role, I tend to work globally, virtual teams have been something that it's not new. Virtual teams aren't new. And we were trying to begin to work out how can we do this better in the old world. I would like to tell you that we've cracked it and it's dead simple and everybody feels great. I don't think that's true at all. I think people can do the transactional stuff just fine, but I have a lot of people struggling beyond the transactional stuff, feeling quite lonely at times. I find myself naturally talking more and more to fewer and fewer people, because what's happened in our teams and in the way we work is you just don't bump into people in the same way. You don't have the reason to go, oh yeah, maybe we'll catch up over a coffee. Or so you tend to have your own team and you tend to just narrow and narrow and narrow. And I've really had to force myself. So I'm doing virtual world tours now, and I'll go and speak to people and try it that I wouldn't normally just bump into, because I found this quite difficult. On our well-being side, how do we apprentice people? How do we train people? And we're only just now starting to put in, you've got to be active. Everything's got to be active. Stuff that happened passively now has to be active. So if we want to teach people things, we've actually got to set up teaching. They would have got it for apprenticeship. And after the first 3 months, that was fine, right? It didn't matter, we'd all learn. Now it's becoming 4, 5, 6 months. We're having to rethink teaching people. We're having to rethink how to really build social interaction in this world, in this virtual world. But some things like team meetings, because everybody gets onto the same level playing field, goes back to my January experience, I think are better. I can communicate now much more easily to large groups without having to travel, sit in a town hall. Suddenly, if you want to get 50 people on the phone, it's easy. And they all interact and they're learning how to do it. So there is advantages as well to bond and create a global team. But one thing we're doing is creating project work. So how do we create communities, which we wouldn't have created before? And then how do we get those communities with activity that runs across the community, working virtually on that topic? Whether that, is our colleague engagement itself, whether that's a model we're putting in place. But our ability to globally get 30 or 50 people on a topic where before we'd have had 7 or 8 in one place and 7 or 8 in another and brought them together is actually really improved.
With the pandemic as well, what are you thinking around how leadership might need to evolve as a result of these? Are there some things which you think need to be accentuated more, some things that need to change in order to get organizations to move? Decisive
leadership and decision-making, I think, is key. When you make a decision, you have to then be willing to unmake that decision very quickly, because you may have got it wrong. And I think that's the thing for now in a situation like this, which changes literally every week. That's real leadership. And it's not just Greg Case, our CEO. It's at every level we need people to be able to be willing to take those decisions and do them quickly, given changing circumstances. So that's been probably, it's been pretty exciting to see it play out, but quite demanding on people to do those things, particularly when they are, and ironically, in a virtual world, right, where there's nobody to turn to, literally nobody to turn to. So it's been, that's probably one of the big changes of leadership. But the second part is, I think more so than ever, there is a compassionate side of leadership, which is important in this time. And this, I know it's a cliche, but actually accepting the circumstances that colleagues are under, knowing that somebody has got 2 young children at home, they're a single parent and they've got to deal with them, accepting that it's not perfect, taking time out to ask each other and make sure we are okay.
So James, as a leader, I would be interested in understanding what are the things that you've done differently over the past 2 to 3 months. I mean, if you reflect on this, you know, change in the leadership and this move towards more compassionate leadership. Concretely, what have you done, or what are the 2 or 3 things that you would like to keep from this period of time?
For me, it's building. I mean, the thing that I've been most proud of this year is building communities and building, I mentioned a bit earlier, but building groups together, even in a virtual world. We're trying to put in place a general global operating model where we are, you know, in Aon, we have about 50,000 colleagues. We're trying to get, we have sort of got about 20,000 of them working in this global model we, called Aon Business Services. It's one of the big things we're doing to try and leverage scale and make ourselves more efficient. Last year, that was sort of normal, right? This year, how do you do that virtually? And the only way you can do it, because reporting lines are completely pointless, right? Everyone worries about reporting lines. I think they're totally pointless. People have to want to work together. And I'm not saying we've cracked it, we haven't at all. And people, there's a long way to go. But trying to create communities, trying to get people to want to be part of them, trying to get them to do that globally and virtually, and trying to inspire people to do that, that to me is real leadership in a situation like this. And look, I'm not pretending I've cracked it, I'm great at it, whatever, but I'm trying. And I think that's really, really important. Let's say for us, it's maybe different organizations, but for a global organization to build a global team in a period like this, that takes quite a lot of thought.